The private room at the back of the restaurant held 40 people, and every one of them was there to celebrate a deal I was going to decide the next morning. They did not know that, of course. To them, it was my father's night. Martin Whitlock, 23 years at Tradewell Group, the account man who had finally landed the biggest deal of his career, and tomorrow, he was sure, the deal that would make him partner. He had reserved the whole room. He had ordered the good wine before anyone arrived. He stood near the head of the long table in a new jacket, glowing the way a man glows when he believes the world has finally agreed with the opinion he has always held of himself. I sat at the far end, near the service door where the waiters came in and out with trays. That was my seat. It had been my seat at every family gathering for as long as I could remember, the way some people have a favorite chair and some people are simply put where they will be least in the way. I did not mind it that night. I had a reason to be quiet that none of them could have guessed. My mother found me before the entrees came. Paulette Whitlock has a particular smile she saves for me, warm on the surface and cold underneath, the smile of a woman delivering bad news she enjoys. She set her hand on my shoulder and leaned down so the people nearby could hear. "Still playing pretend with that career of yours?" she said. "One of these days you'll join the real world, sweetheart. Your father certainly has." A few people laughed. Not cruel laughter. Comfortable laughter. The laughter of people repeating a joke they have heard so many times it has stopped being a joke and become a fact. Greer and her little business. Greer who never grew up. Greer the disappointment. The candle in the center of the table had burned down unevenly, and the wax had pooled and hardened on one side. And I remember looking at that small, ordinary thing while my mother stood over me. Because that is what you learn to do at a table like that. You find an ordinary thing to rest your eyes on, a candle, a water ring, the edge of a folded napkin, and you let the moment pass through you without leaving a mark anyone can see. I had been finding ordinary things to look at in that family since I was a girl. I had gotten very good at it. One of my father's colleagues, a younger man named Dell, who had clearly heard the joke before and clearly believed it, leaned toward me with the easy condescension of a person who thinks he is being kind. "It's good that you keep at it, though," he said. "The little hustle? Not everybody's cut out for the corporate grind." He said it the way you might compliment a child's drawing before you put it in a drawer. I thanked him. I actually thanked him? That is how thoroughly I had learned my part. I looked up at her and I smiled back and I said, "Maybe one of these days." She patted my cheek, satisfied, and went back toward the center of the room where the warmth was. I want to be honest about that moment because everything that came after depends on it. I had, sitting in my coat pocket, the final terms of a transaction that would decide the next 10 years of my father's working life. I had spent the afternoon with my lawyers. I knew, to the dollar, what tomorrow was worth to the man standing at the head of that table, and I let my mother pat my cheek and walk away, because I had learned a long time ago that there is no sentence I can say at that table that lands. The table does not hear me. I had decided, somewhere on the drive over, to let the morning do the talking. I watched my brother instead. Hayes was halfway down the table, holding court for two of my father's colleagues, telling a story with his hands. Hayes has always been able to fill a room. He is the kind of man people describe as going places, a description that has followed him for 45 years without anyone noticing he has not actually arrived anywhere in particular. That night he was wonderful. He toasted our father twice. He called him a legend. The colleagues nodded and laughed and refilled their glasses. At some point, Hayes caught me watching, and he raised his glass in my direction with a grin that the table read as warmth and that I read as something else entirely. "To my sister," he said, "who keeps us humble." More laughter. His wife Celia laughed loudest, because Celia had long ago understood which way the wind blew in this family and had built her whole position on agreeing with it. I lifted my water glass an inch in return and said nothing. There is a particular skill in being toasted as a punchline and not letting your face move. I had that skill the way other people have perfect pitch. It had been trained into me young. What none of them could see was that I had spent the afternoon in a room with 3 lawyers going over the diligence on a company they had no idea existed in any serious form. I had signed non-disclosure agreements thicker than the menu in front of me. I had a car waiting to take me to a closing in the morning that would be written about, quietly, in the trade press. And I sat there and absorbed a toast to my own irrelevance, and I want you to understand that I did not do it because I was weak. I did it because I had finally, after 30 years, stopped needing the table to be wrong about me out loud. The morning would handle that. I only had to get through the soup. The only person in that room who looked at me like I was a person was my niece, June. She is 13. She was sitting closer to the middle, bored, the way 13-year-olds are bored at adult dinners. And at some point she noticed that the breadbasket had gone around the table and skipped my end, the way things tended to skip my end. She picked it up, got out of her chair, walked the length of the table, and set it down in front of me without a word. Then she went back to her seat. It was a small thing. It is the kind of small thing you remember for the rest of your life. I ate a piece of bread I did not want because she had brought it, and I listened to my family celebrate a victory that did not exist yet, and I drove home alone through the dark with the terms folded in my pocket. I did not feel triumphant. I want that on the record, too. I felt tired and a little sad, the way you feel when you already know how a story ends, and you wish, against all the evidence, that it could end some other way. I let myself in, hung up my coat, and stood in my own quiet kitchen for a while. Tomorrow they would all learn something about me that I had known for 13 years. I was not looking forward to it. I just no longer saw a way around it. I should tell you what the little business actually was, because the gap between what my family believed and what was true is the whole engine of this. I started Sundial Systems in 2013 when I was 29 in a rented office above a tire shop on the wrong side of an industrial road. The whole place smelled of rubber and warm asphalt. I had 2 folding tables, 1 second-hand server, and a partner named Soren Maddox, who had quit a good job to build something uncertain with me. We wrote routing and cold chain software, the unglamorous code that decides how a refrigerated truck full of vaccines or strawberries or insulin gets from a warehouse to 100 destinations without anything spoiling on the way. It is not the kind of thing anyone makes a movie about. It is the kind of thing that when it fails, people quietly die of. And when it works, no one ever thinks about it all. It worked. By 2018, we were the platform that the serious players ran on. By the time of that dinner, Sundial moved the logistics for a meaningful slice of the country's perishable medicine. We had 300 employees. I owned the controlling share. I had turned down 4 offers to sell and 2 offers to take us public because I liked the company we had, and I did not like what either of those paths would have done to it. I remember the night we knew it had actually worked. It was a winter evening in 2017, and a hospital network 3 states away had nearly lost an entire shipment of temperature-sensitive medicine to a storm that closed half the highways. Our system rerouted the trucks in the dark, in real time, around the closures, and the medicine arrived, and somewhere a pharmacy opened the next morning with the shelves it needed. No one will ever make a film about that night. There was no applause. Soren and I sat in the office above the tire shop, watching the little dots move across a map on a cheap monitor, eating cold takeout, and when the last truck reached its dock, he simply said, "That's a real thing we just did." It was the proudest I have ever been. It was the kind of pride that does not need a table to clap for it. And I think that night was when I quietly understood I would never again be able to explain my life to people who measured it by the wrong instrument. That is the strange loneliness of building something real. The bigger and more genuine it gets, the harder it becomes to describe to the people who only ever wanted it to be small. My work had no logo my mother would recognize, no title that fit on a holiday card, no story that translated into the currency my family traded in. To them, a man in a suit who manages other men is a success, and a woman who quietly keeps medicine cold across a continent is doing her little software thing. I stopped trying to translate years ago. You cannot describe color to someone committed to the idea that you are colorblind. Here is the part that matters. I never hid any of it. I just never performed it. Those are not the same thing, though my family only ever understood the second one. I did not put my face on the website. I did not give interviews. I let Soren run the front of the room because he is better in a room than I am, and because, somewhere underneath all the practical reasons, I think I wanted to be the one thing my family had decided I was not. Successful in a way that did not need an audience. The morning of the signing, I drove to the Sundial offices before dawn to go over the final terms one more time. Soren was already there, 2 coffees on his desk, the deal book open between us. "You know what's funny," he said. He did not look like it was funny. "They still think they're buying this from a board. Caro's flown in to charm a board of directors into a sale. He's about to find out the board is you, one person, in a chair he probably won't expect." "He'll manage," I said. "He'll have to?" Soren turned a page. "You sure you want family in the building for this? Your dad invited half the Whitlocks to watch him close it. They're going to be in that room, Greer, when it lands." I had thought about that. I had thought about little else for a week. "I didn't invite them," I said. "I didn't tell them to stay home either. If I start arranging the room so nobody gets embarrassed, I'll spend the rest of my life arranging rooms. I'm done doing that. Soren looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded, because he had known me for 13 years, and he understood what that sentence had cost to say. I put on my coat to leave. It is a plain gray coat, well-made but quiet, nothing about it that announces anything. My mother had once told me it made me look like I was between things. I had worn it on purpose for years, the way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts. That morning I wore it because it was mine, and because I had decided that the last thing I was going to do was dress up for people who had never once dressed up their opinion of me. To understand why a coat could carry that much weight, you have to go back to a kitchen in the summer of 2002 when I was 18. There had been money set aside, not a fortune, but a real amount, saved across years in an account my parents called the kids' future. We all knew about it. It was supposed to be split. That summer, sitting at the kitchen table with the acceptance letters in front of me, I learned it had become Hayes's money. All of it. He was going to need it, my father explained, for the program he was starting, the one that was going to set him up. I would be fine. I always landed on my feet. He's got the head for something real, my father said. He said it kindly. That is the part people never believe. He was not a monster. He genuinely thought he was describing the weather. A simple fact about his two children, the way one might note that one of them was tall and the other was not. You'll figure it out, Greer. You always do. I did figure it out. I worked. I took jobs that taught me things, and I read everything I could find, and I sat in the back of free seminars. And in time, I learned enough to build something. But the lesson that summer was not really about money. The money was just the proof. The lesson was that a decision had already been made about who I was, long before I'd done anything at all, and that no result I produced was going to reopen it. I remember the exact shape of that afternoon. My mother was at the counter slicing tomatoes, not even turning around, as though the conversation were too settled to require her face. The acceptance letters were in front of me, 3 of them, and I had been so proud of them that I had laid them out like cards. My father picked one up, looked at it for a moment, set it back down, and slid it an inch away from himself. And that small motion told me everything before he said a word. Hayes was not even in the room. He did not have to be. He was 22 and between plans. And the plan he was between was going to need funding, and I was 18 with a head my father had decided was good only for landing on its feet. It's not that we don't believe in you, my mother said to the tomatoes. It's that Hayes needs it more. You're so independent, Greer. You don't need things the way he does. I have thought about that sentence for 24 years. The punishment for being capable was to be given less. The reward for being needy was to be given everything. It is a strange math. And once a family commits to it, the more you achieve, the more you confirm that you never needed their support in the first place, and so the less you will ever get. I was, in their eyes, the child who would be fine, and so I was the child they never had to think about. And a person you never have to think about is a person you have quietly stopped seeing. That was the wound, and the money was only where it happened to bleed. I tested that theory for years, the way you keep poking a door you suspect is locked. When Sundial got its first big contract, I mentioned it at Thanksgiving. My mother asked if it came with health insurance. When we crossed 100 employees, I told my father over the phone. He asked if Hayes could maybe get a job there, since things were a little slow for him. Every fact I brought home got remodeled, in real time, into more evidence for the verdict they had already reached. Cute little business, never quite made it. Lucky to have us. There was one moment, years back, when my father had a health scare. A frightening week with his heart, and the bills came faster than his insurance moved. I sent money, quietly, through my mother, a real amount, enough to matter. I learned later that it had been folded into the family story as Greer finally pitching in for once, as if I had been a freeloader who had grudgingly chipped in, when in fact I had paid for the thing that kept the lights on. I stopped correcting the story after that. You cannot win an argument with people who are remembering it backward. So no, when my mother patted my cheek at that dinner, I did not flinch. I had stopped expecting that door to open a long time ago. What I had not figured out, even by the morning of the signing, was how to stop wanting it to. The thing about the deal, the part that turned my whole life over, is that I did not arrange it. I want to be careful about that, because it would be a different and uglier story if I had. The approach came in early 2025. Soren walked into my office one afternoon and set a single page on my desk and said, "You're going to want to read who this is." It was an acquisition inquiry, a mid-sized distributor stagnating, betting its future on buying its way into the modern logistics world rather than building it. They wanted Sundial. and the name on the letterhead was Tradewell Group, my father's company, the place he had given 23 years and most of his pride. I sat with that page for a long time. I could have killed it in an afternoon. One sentence to Soren and the inquiry would have gone into a drawer, and Tradewell would have moved on to some other target, none the wiser, and my two lives would have stayed in their separate rooms. I thought about it. I genuinely did. Instead, I told Soren to run it straight, on the merits. No favors, no sabotage, no special hatred. Treat them like anyone else who comes to the door, I said. If the deal is good for our people, we listen. If it isn't, we don't. Just like always. I told myself that was integrity. Maybe it was. But underneath it, if I'm honest, was something smaller and more human. I wanted to see what they were made of. I wanted to watch my father's company come to my door, hat in hand, and ask to buy the thing I had built while they were busy deciding I was nothing. I am not proud of that wanting. I am just not going to pretend it was not there. The negotiation ran for a year. It ran through Soren and through the lawyers, the way these things do, and my name stayed where it had always stayed, off the front, on the ownership documents that nobody reads until the very end. Tradewell's team knew they were buying a company with a controlling owner. They did not know or did not connect that the owner shared a last name with one of their own account directors. Whitlock is not a rare name. Martin had no idea the company he was chasing was mine, and I, having decided to let the merits decide, did not tell him. There were a dozen moments across that year when I could have. My father called me, more than usual, that spring, because for the first time in a long time, he wanted something from me, which was an audience for his excitement. He told me about the big target Tradewell was pursuing. He called it a real coup, the thing that finally proves what I've been saying for years. He never named the company on the phone, partly out of professional discretion, and partly because he assumed I would not understand it anyway. It's complicated. Logistics technology. You wouldn't follow the details, he said once, to me, the person who had written the details. I sat in my office, looking at the same deal from the other side of the table, listening to my own father describe my own company back to me as the prize that would finally make his life make sense. And I said, "That sounds like a big one, Dad." And it was true. It was the biggest one of his life. He just had the direction backward. I told myself every time that staying quiet was the disciplined thing, the fair thing, the only way to keep the deal honest. And it was all of that. But I have learned to be suspicious of my own clean reasons, and the truth has a second floor. Part of me was waiting. Part of me wanted the moment to arrive on its own, undeniably, in a room, so that for once it would not be my word against 30 years of their conviction. I was tired of being the only witness to my own life. I wanted, just once, a room full of witnesses I had not had to convince. The morning of the signing, standing in the sundial lobby, buttoning my plain coat, I finally understood the shape of what was about to happen. My father had invited the family to the close. He thought he was bringing them to watch him win. He was actually bringing them to watch the two halves of my life meet in a conference room in front of 40 people for the first time. I drove across town toward Tradewell with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart going like something trapped. There is a version of this story where I spared him, and I need you to understand how close I came to living in it. I arrived early. The Tradewell building is all glass and gray carpet, the kind of lobby designed to make you feel both impressed and unimportant. I gave my name at the desk as a representative of Sundial, which was true, and the receptionist did not blink, because to her I was a woman in a quiet coat there for a meeting. I sat in the lobby and I waited, and while I waited I heard my father. He was around a corner, near the elevators, with two younger colleagues. He did not know I was there. He was telling them about his daughter. "She runs some little software thing," he said. "Never really amounted to much between you and me. But she's family, you know. We keep her around." A small laugh. "Today's the day, boys. They sign this afternoon and I make partner. 23 years. About time the company noticed who's been carrying it." I sat very still and I felt the strangest thing. Not anger exactly. A kind of vertigo. Because I realized, sitting there, that I held in my hands the power to make every word of what he had just said come true. I could walk into that room and sign Caro's deal as written, the full acquisition, the whole company, on the terms Tradewell wanted. My father would get his partnership, Caro would get the crown of his career, and the family, when they learned it was me, would finally have to revise the story. Greer came through. Greer made Dad partner. Greer, it turns out, mattered all along. For one long minute, I wanted that more than I can tell you. I wanted to buy their respect with my own company. It would have been the most expensive thing I had ever purchased, and the least real. And I knew it even while I wanted it, and I still almost did it. What stopped me was a document. That week, as part of the final diligence, Soren had gotten his hands on Tradewell's integration plan. The plan for what they would do with Sundial after they owned it. I had read it on the plane back from a site visit, and I had read it again that morning. It was efficient and it was brutal. They were going to take the platform, strip it for the contracts and the technology, and gut the operations floor, the warehouse and dispatch people, the dock crews, the men and women who actually moved the trucks. 3 sites would close inside 18 months and the work would go offshore. Hundreds of jobs, the ordinary, unglamorous, load-bearing jobs, gone so that Tradewell could book the savings and Caro could tell his board he had transformed the company. And the men on that floor were my father's people. Not him, he was upstairs in sales, but the kind of men he had come up with, men like Roy Tucker. I should tell you about Roy. Years ago, before any of this, when I was nobody and Sundial was an idea, I had gone to a Tradewell loading dock to study how the trucks were really loaded, because you cannot write good software for a world you have not stood inside. Roy Tucker was a dock supervisor, 60 then maybe, gruff and kind. He had no idea who I was. He spent 2 hours showing me how the work actually happened, the gap between the manifest and the reality, and at the end he bought me a coffee from the machine and told me, "Whatever you're building, kid, talk to the people who lift the boxes. The suits never do." I had built my whole company on that sentence. I had never forgotten it. Roy still worked there. I had checked. He was 62 now, still on the dock, and he was on the list of jobs the integration plan erased. Line after line of people reduced to a column in a spreadsheet labeled, "Redundancies Phase 2. I thought about the coffee from the machine. I thought about a man who had no reason to be kind to a stranger and was kind anyway, who had handed me the one sentence my entire company was built on, and who would come to work one ordinary morning 18 months from now and be told that the floor he had run for decades was closing so that men in a glass building could book a saving and call it strategy. I thought about how he would never connect that morning to a daughter at a dinner table or a deal in a conference room. He would just lose his job, quietly, the way the people who lift the boxes always do, while the people who decide their lives are off somewhere being congratulated. I folded the plan back into my coat pocket and the wanting went quiet, because some choices make themselves once you let yourself look straight at them. I was not going to trade Roy Tucker's floor for my mother's approval. I was not going to buy a seat at a table by selling the people who had taught me how a table is actually set. If that meant the door to my family stayed locked forever, then it stayed locked. I had carried the key around long enough to know it had never fit anyway. I found Soren in a small anteroom off the main conference room, 20 minutes before it was set to start. I closed the door. "We're changing the shape," I said. He did not panic. He has never panicked in 13 years. He just set down his coffee. "Tell me." "No full acquisition. We don't sell them the company. We license the platform to them, bounded, with hard terms, on a structure that keeps our operations ours and our people employed. They get the technology they say they need to compete. They do not get to gut 3 sites and ship the floor overseas. That part is not on the table. It was never going to be on the table. I just had to be sure." Soren was quiet for a moment, working it through, the lawyer and the builder in him both running at once. "Caro flew 300 miles to buy the whole thing," he said finally. "He told his board he was bringing home an acquisition. He's going to land this in front of 40 people, including your family, and it is not going to be the thing he came for." "Then he'll land softly," I said, "and he'll land honest, which is more than I ever got in a room full of my family. He can take a real deal that protects real people, or he can take nothing and explain that to his board. I think he's smart enough to take the deal, but I'm fine if he isn't." Soren looked at me, and something in his face was proud and sad at the same time. "Your father's going to think you did this to him." "I know," I said. "You didn't." "I know that too." I put my hand on the door. "But knowing it and surviving him believing the opposite are 2 different jobs. I can only do the first one. Let's go." He stopped me with a hand on my arm just for a second. "For what it's worth," he said, "the kid above the tire shop would be glad it was you in this chair. Not them. You. I was there. I remember who actually built it." It was a small thing to say in the 30 seconds before a meeting that would turn my life over, and it held me steady the whole way through the door, because it was the thing I had needed someone to say for 30 years, and the person saying it had earned the right by being in the room for all of it. That is who you let speak at the turns of your life, not the people who decided who you were before you arrived, the people who were standing next to you while you became it. I opened the door. The room was already full. The Tradewell main conference room is long, with a wall of windows down one side, and a table that seats maybe 20, with chairs lined against the walls for everyone else. There were close to 40 people in it, Tradewell's deal team and lawyers, 2 members of their board, and clustered near the windows because my father had wanted them to have the good view, the family. My mother in her best blouse, Hayes, in a suit he had clearly bought for the occasion, already smiling like the photographs were being taken. Celia beside him, June, looking at her phone, and my father at the center of it all, vibrating with the importance of the day, certain he was the reason everyone was there. When I walked in my plain coat, my mother saw me first. I watched confusion move across her face. What is Greer doing here? Then a flicker of something like embarrassment, the assumption that I had somehow wandered in where I did not belong, that I would have to be quietly managed out before the important people arrived. She actually started to rise, to come and handle me. She did not get the chance, because that was the moment Desmond Caro walked in from the other door. Caro is the chief executive of Tradewell Group. He had indeed flown 300 miles that morning to close the deal of his life. He is a tall man, silver-haired, with the easy gravity of someone who has been the most important person in every room he has entered for 20 years. He came in already speaking, already shaking hands, working the room the way men like him do, and he was scanning the whole time for the person who mattered. The principal, the one whose signature the entire year had been pointing toward. His eyes went past my father. They went past the board members. They found me by the door, in the gray coat my mother thought made me look like I was between things. And Desmond Caro crossed the entire room to me, put out his hand, and said, loud enough that the conversations died around him, "Ms. Whitlock, it's an honor to finally meet you in person." The room went very quiet. He kept going because he did not know there was anything to be careful about. "I'll say to the room what I've said to your team all year. Whatever she decides, that's where we are. It's her company. Nothing in here moves without her." He smiled, warm and certain. "So, shall we sit down and find out if I get to keep my job?" 40 people turned to look at the disappointment. I have tried, many times since, to describe my father's face in that moment, and the best I can do is this. It came apart slowly, the way ice comes apart in spring. No single crack, just a structure you had trusted quietly ceasing to hold. He looked at Caro. He looked at me. He looked at the hand I was shaking, his chief executive's hand, the most important hand in his entire working life, extended first and most respectfully to the daughter he had described 20 minutes earlier, around the corner, as someone who never really amounted to much. I watched it travel around the room in stages, the way a lamp coming on lights one thing and then the next. The board members understood first because they knew exactly whose signature the year had been pointing toward, and they were already recalculating, already looking at me with the swift reassessment of people who realize they have been in the presence of the principal without knowing it. Then the deal team. Then, slowly, the family by the windows, who did not have the context the professionals had, who only knew that the most important man in the building had walked past the father and the brother and the polished suits and crossed the entire room to shake the hand of the woman in the coat that made her look like she was between things. Hayes's grin was the last thing in the room to die. He kept it up the longest because his whole self was built on it, and I watched him try to fit what was happening into a story where he was still the impressive one, and fail, and the grin slid off his face like something that had lost its grip. Celia put her hand on his arm. June looked up from her phone, and a slow, delighted understanding spread across my niece's face. The only uncomplicated reaction in the room, the look of a 13-year-old realizing that the aunt everybody talked over was, it turned out, the entire reason they were all there. My mother had frozen half out of her chair. "Greer," she said, very low, into the quiet. "What is this?" I did not answer her. I shook Caro's hand, and I said it was good to meet him too, and the truth is the room had already answered her better than I could have. I took off my plain coat and laid it over the back of the chair at the head of the table, and I sat down. I am not going to pretend there was no part of me that felt it. There was. 13 years of being patted on the cheek had a weight, and for a few seconds in that room the weight lifted, and I felt almost weightless, and I understood exactly why people chase revenge, because that lightness is a kind of drug. But I had decided, in the anteroom, what kind of person I was going to be in this room, and the feeling was not going to make the decisions. I had a floor full of people to protect, and a man named Roy Tucker on a list and a deal to reshape, and I had a family watching, and the easiest thing in the world right then would have been to perform, to make a speech, to let my father have it with 40 witnesses after a lifetime of small humiliations. The audience was right there. It would have been so satisfying. I did not do it. Not because I am a saint, because I had learned, building a company, that the cheap, satisfying thing and the right, durable thing almost never wear the same coat, and the discipline of the whole job is telling them apart in the half second when only one of them feels good. So I ran the meeting. I thanked Caro for coming. I told him honestly that I respected what he was trying to do for Tradewell, that the instinct to modernize was right, even if the method was wrong. And then I told the room that the deal on the table, the full acquisition, was not the deal we were going to do. You could feel the temperature change. Caro's deal team shifted in their seats. One of the board members leaned forward. I laid it out plainly. I did not raise my voice. I have found that the quieter you are when you are saying something hard, the harder it is to argue with. I told them Sundial would not be sold. I told them we would license the platform to Tradewell on bounded, hard terms that would give them the technology they needed to compete, real value, fairly priced. And I told them the integration plan, the one that closed 3 sites and sent the operations floor overseas, was not part of any version of any deal I would sign. The people who moved the trucks stayed. That was not a negotiating position. That was the condition of my presence in the building. You're protecting our floor, Caro said slowly. Our floor, people who don't work for you. Somebody showed me how that floor works once, a long time ago, I said. I built everything on it. I'm not going to be the reason it disappears. There was a silence while Caro did the arithmetic that men like him are very good at. He had come for an empire. He was being offered a real, defensible, profitable arrangement that he could take back to his board, that would modernize the company, that would not crown him but would not embarrass him either. The other option was to fly 300 miles home with nothing. He asked for the room, briefly, and conferred with his board members in low voices by the window, 3 men deciding whether pride was worth more than profit. I have sat through enough of those huddles to know how they go. The numbers always win in the end, because the numbers are the only thing in the room without an ego. He took the deal. Of course he took the deal. He was not a fool, whatever else he was. We shook hands again, and this time it meant something different. 2 principals who had found the actual shape of a thing. You're a harder negotiator than your reputation, he said, and then after a beat, with a glance toward the windows where my family sat. Though I'm starting to think I didn't have your full reputation. I did not explain it to him. It was not his to understand. And across the room, my father understood, in real time, what had just happened to him. There would be no acquisition. There would be no transformation for him to have brought home. There would be no partnership. The deal of his life had just become a modest licensing agreement negotiated by his own daughter on terms that protected the warehouse instead of the executives. He had brought his family to watch his coronation, and he was watching, instead, a quiet correction of his entire understanding of the world. He found me afterward in the hallway while the lawyers turned the new shape into paper. For a moment, he just looked at me, and I saw him try several different faces before he settled on the one I knew best. The wounded one. The one that turned every situation into something that had been done to him. You could have just let it happen, he said. His voice was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was small. You knew. All year you knew. You could have let me have this one thing, Greer. One thing. After everything. I want to tell you I had a perfect answer. I did not. I had the true one, which is rarely perfect. I let you have 40 years of things, I said. I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because it's just true. And I think today is a day for true things. This is the first time the table ever tilted the other way, and you're standing here calling it cruelty. I didn't do anything to you. I protected 300 people you've never met from losing their jobs so that you could have a title. I would do it again. I'm sorry it cost you something. It cost me something too. It cost me 30 years. He did not have an answer for that. He looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger who happened to have his daughter's face. And in a way, I suppose he was, because the daughter he had invented all those years ago had never actually existed, and the real one had just walked into his workplace and rearranged it without raising her voice. He turned and went to find my mother. I let him go. There was nothing in that hallway for either of us to fix. The campaign started within days, because that is what my family did when reality disagreed with them. They did not adjust. They mounted a defense. Hayes called first. My brother, who can fill a room, filled my voicemail. He was furious in the particular way of a man who has just discovered that the sibling he was raised to feel superior to has been quietly more substantial than him for over a decade, and who cannot say that, so says other things instead. I had humiliated our father. I had always thought I was better than the family. I had hidden my success specifically to spring it on them, which was, he said, a sick thing to do. I noticed he did not ask a single question about the company itself. Not what it did. Not how I had built it. Not one. The fact of it was only ever a wound to him, a thing that had happened to his self-image, and he wanted me to apologize for the injury. I did not call him back. There was nothing to say to a man who was angry that I existed at a size he had not approved. Celia called once, on Hayes's behalf, which told me everything about the state of my brother. She used the word family 11 times in a single voicemail. I counted later because the repetition was so striking. She wanted me to understand that family forgives, that family shows up, that family does not embarrass family, all the warm words deployed in exactly one direction, toward the obligation I owed them, and never toward the one they had owed me for 30 years. Family had been a one-way street my whole life, paved smooth in the direction of Hayes, and full of potholes in the direction of me, and now that I had finally driven down it the other way, they wanted to talk about the rules of the road. I did not call Celia back either. My mother did not call at all. That, in its way, said the most. Paulette Whitlock had spent my whole life narrating me, and now that the narration had collapsed, she had nothing. She went silent. I learned secondhand that she had taken to telling relatives that I had changed, that success had gone to my head, that I was not the girl they raised. She was not wrong about the last part. They had not raised the woman in that conference room. That woman had raised herself above a tire shop, in a building that smelled of rubber while they were busy looking the other way. What struck me in those weeks was how little of the campaign was about me at all. Not one of them in any message asked what Sundial did, or how I had built it, or whether I was proud of it, or whether the floor I had fought to protect was full of people with families of their own. The company that had reorganized their entire understanding of me in a single afternoon held no interest for them as a thing in the world. It interested them only as an injury they had sustained. I had spent decades thinking that if they only understood what I had made, they would finally see me. The fallout taught me the opposite. They had never wanted to see me. They had wanted me to stay the shape that made their own story comfortable, and the unforgivable thing I had done was not hiding my success. It was being larger than the box they had built, and refusing at last to fold myself back into it. What came back to me from the good direction came quietly. A few days after the signing, an envelope arrived at the Sundial offices addressed in careful block capitals. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. It said, "Heard what you did for the floor. My crew kept their jobs. I don't know if you remember, an old dock supervisor and a cup of bad coffee, but I never forgot the kid who actually listened. Proud of you, whoever you turned out to be, Roy Tucker." I sat at my desk and I read it 3 times, and I will tell you that the old dock supervisor's note meant more to me than every word my family had ever said about my work, combined. Because Roy had nothing to gain by writing it. He was not adjusting a story about himself. He had simply seen something true and said so. That is the whole difference. That is the entire difference between the people worth keeping and the people you keep hoping will change. You would think the victory would taste like victory. It did not entirely, and I have stopped being surprised by that. Being right is cold. I had been right for 30 years. Right that I was more than they thought. Right that the door was locked. Right that the deal would expose all of it. And being right had never once kept me warm. What I felt in the weeks after was grief, which is a strange thing to feel when you have just won. I grieved the ordinary daughter I was never going to get to be in their eyes. There is a version of me in some other family who could have just been a person. Not a disappointment, not a secret success, just a daughter who was loved at her actual size, neither inflated nor diminished. I had wanted to be small enough to keep. That was the truth under all of it, the thing I could barely admit to myself. For years I had kept my success quiet, not only out of pride, but out of a doomed, childish hope that if I stayed small enough, ordinary enough, they would finally have room to love me. I had been trying to shrink myself into their affection, and it had never worked, because the problem was never my size. The problem was that they had decided who I was before I could speak, and no amount of shrinking or growing was ever going to change a verdict that had nothing to do with me in the first place. I had to stop inventing them. That was the real work, and it was harder than building the company. Every few days, my mind would draft a new version of my mother, a version who called to ask about the business with genuine curiosity, a version of my father who said he was proud, a version of Hayes who wanted to know what cold chain rooting even was. I had been writing those imaginary people my whole life, casting my real family in roles they had never once agreed to play. The grief was in firing them from the parts, in letting my actual mother be my actual mother, and stopping the audition. One evening in March, June mailed me a drawing. My 13-year-old niece, who does not yet know the family rules well enough to follow them, had drawn a picture of a truck with a little sun on the side, and under it she had written, "This is your company. I think it's cool." She had found the address herself. She had used a real stamp. I put it on my refrigerator, where it still is, and I sat in my kitchen that night, the same kitchen where I had stood the night before the signing, and I let myself feel the whole thing at once, the relief and the grief together, the company safe and the people safe and the family gone, and I understood that this was simply what it cost. There was no version where it was free. There is a thing nobody tells you about being underestimated for a long time, which is that you start to do it to yourself. The verdict gets inside. For years, even as the company grew, even as the numbers said otherwise, some small, permanent part of me had wondered whether they were right, whether I really was the disappointment who had gotten lucky, whether the whole thing might collapse the moment someone looked at it closely. That is what a childhood verdict does. It does not stay in the family. It moves into your own head and pays no rent and criticizes the furniture. The hardest work of those weeks was not severing from my mother or my brother. It was evicting the version of them I had been carrying inside myself, the internal voice that had narrated my life in their tone, and learning slowly to narrate it in my own. I started small. I let myself say, out loud, alone in my kitchen, that I had built a good company. Just that. It felt absurd and enormous, like lifting something I had been told my whole life I was too weak to lift, and discovering it was not even that heavy, that the weight had been a story. I said it again the next day. I am still saying it. Some sentences you have to repeat for years before they stop sounding like a lie and start sounding like your own voice. Soren came by the office late that same week, and we sat with the lights low and the deal done, and he said, "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I'm going to be. That's different from okay. It's better, actually. Okay would have been a lie." He nodded. He did not try to fix it. After 13 years, he knew that some things are not problems to be solved, only weights to be carried until they get lighter, and that the kindest thing you can do for someone carrying one is to sit with them and not pretend it is not heavy. The doors, in the end, resolved the way doors actually resolve, which is to say, not cleanly, not in a way that would make a satisfying ending, but in a way that was true. My mother left her door shut, and she left it shut herself. I did not slam it. I simply stopped pushing on it, and once I stopped pushing, it turned out there had never been anything holding it open from the other side. We do not speak now. I send a card on her birthday. I do not expect a reply, and I do not get one. And I have made my peace with the shape of that, which is its own kind of door, neither open nor fully closed, just still. Hayes severed himself. That is the honest way to say it. I did not cut my brother off. He cut himself off, on the principle that a person who has humiliated you by being more than you expected cannot be forgiven for it. And he chose, in the end, the comfort of his story over the discomfort of the truth. I hear about him sometimes. He is, as ever, going places. I wish him well in the abstract way you wish well to someone you have stopped expecting anything from. My father came to my door in April, alone. No audience, which was the only way it could have meant anything. I almost did not open it. When I did, he stood on my step looking older than I had ever seen him, holding nothing, having prepared nothing, which I think was the most honest he had ever been with me. "I introduced you wrong," he said. "For 30 years, I introduced you wrong, to everyone, to myself." He stopped. He did not have the rest of it. "I don't know how to fix that." And the truth was, neither did I. I had spent years imagining the apology, and now that a version of it was standing on my step, I understood that an apology cannot reach back 30 years and re-raise a child. It cannot undo a verdict. It can only be a small, true thing said in a doorway by a tired man, and I could either pretend it was more than that or accept it as exactly what it was. I left the door open 1 inch. Not wide. I did not invite him in. I did not promise him Sundays. But I didn't close it either. We stood there, the two of us, looking at each other through that 1 inch of space. And for the first time in my life, he was looking at the actual person I am, and not the convenient story. And I let him look. "That's all I've got right now," I told him. 1 inch. We can both see through it. Maybe that's something. Maybe it's all we ever get. I don't know yet. He nodded. He understood it was more than he had earned and less than he had hoped for, which is the honest exchange rate of these things. He went home. We have spoken twice since, briefly, carefully. Two people learning a language neither of us was ever taught. I do not know where it goes. I have stopped needing to know in advance. The only door I opened all the way was June's. She comes to the Sundial offices one Saturday a month now, with her parents' grudging permission, and I show her how the trucks move and how the sun gets on the side of the box, and she asks better questions than any of the adults in my family ever did. She is the one who didn't laugh. I will keep that door open as long as she wants to walk through it, on my terms, which are simply that she gets to be exactly her own size in my company, neither more nor less, the one thing I was never given. I think about that sometimes, what it means to be a door for someone. My family had spent 30 years being a wall for me, a thing I kept walking into and apologizing to. With June, I get to be the other thing. When she tells me about an idea she has, I do not slide it an inch away from myself across a table. I pick it up. I ask her to tell me more. I watch her notice that an adult is actually listening, that the listening is not a trick or a setup for a joke, and I watch something in her settle, the way something in me never quite got to. If I do nothing else with whatever the company made me, I would like to do that. I would like there to be one person in the next generation of this family who grows up certain she was seen. The verdict stops with me. I am the last Whitlock it gets to ruin. One afternoon, I drove the long way back to the office, past the industrial road, past the tire shop that is still there, still smelling of rubber and warm asphalt, where 2 folding tables and a borrowed server had once been the entire future. I sat in the car for a minute and looked at it. The disappointment had built something real in that building, while everyone who loved her was looking the other way. I did not feel bitter about it anymore. I felt, finally, like the right size. I want to say one thing to you before I go, if any of this sounded like your own family. If the people who were supposed to know you best only learned your worth when a stranger said it out loud in front of them, I need you to understand what that tells you. It does not tell you that you finally became worthy. You were always that. It tells you that they were never really looking. The recognition did not change you. It changed nothing about you at all. It only revealed in one clean moment that the verdict they handed you had never been about you in the first place. It was about them, and the story they needed, and the chair they had decided to keep you in. You do not owe your name to a room that learned to say it only once it became useful. You do not have to keep shrinking yourself into someone's affection because the problem was never your size. And you do not have to wait for permission from a parent or a sibling or a boss to be the full thing you already are. Decide your own size. Then go quietly be it in a building they are not looking at and let the morning do the talking. I'm glad you're here. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.